All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you to everyone who's presented already. This is a real inspiration. Cumulatively, you all have an enormous impact, and I think we're beginning to see that and celebrate that. I want to give a special thank you to all the students and family and stakeholders who traveled from a great distance to be here. Thank you for making the effort. We're very glad you're with us. Let's get to our next panel, Recreation or Recreation, Managing for the Future with Isabel English, Peter Engh, Hailey Clark, and Garrett Konet. Take it away.
Everyone, thank you for coming and welcome to our panel. Outdoor recreation is a growing economic sector, which has a lot of benefits for mental and physical health, as well as connecting people with the environment. Recreation has seen a surge in popularity over the last decade, with Gunnison County alone seeing a double in visitation over the last 10 years. This has created a lot of different challenges like environmental concerns and accessibility and inclusivity issues on our public lands. Our projects focus on the importance of outdoor activities and their impacts on individuals, communities, and the environment. Our projects are the culmination of research and collaborating with partners to cover a diverse array of recreational uses like mountain biking, camping, off-highway vehicles, and trail use.
Outdoor recreation and green spaces provide a multitude of benefits. Like, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us were encouraged to go outside and distance ourselves. Being outside in these outdoor recreation areas allows us to improve on our physical well-being through the multiple activities that they provide, like mountain biking, climbing, and as well as mental benefits as well, as multiple studies have proved that being outside in green areas not only benefits us socially and as an individuals, but helps improve mental health with the multitude of activities that you're able to do. Then outdoor recreation areas also provide a plethora of free amenities that we can go out and enjoy and come together as communities in green spaces.
So there are a lot of positives in outdoor recreation, but there are also consequences of outdoor recreation, including the spread of invasive species by human impact, habitat degradation by creating trails through sensitive areas, and user conflicts like the e-bike debate. Trail maintenance and cost of towns and overcrowding of resources are also problems. But luckily, most impacts can be mitigated, and our projects deal with those mitigations.
So as Peter mentioned, there's certainly reason for concern when considering the impact outdoor recreation has on the landscape, individuals, wildlife, and all the others that value the areas and natural resources that have resulted in a valued common ground between us all. All of our projects contribute to the responsible management of outdoor recreation, whether that is through educating trail users, engaging communities, or aiding enforcement, and several other methods that we will discuss throughout this presentation. Managing for outdoor recreation is vital in preserving the reason many are able to connect with the land and experience all the benefits nature has to offer. With that, I will begin by introducing my project that at its core uses several avenues to protect and enhance one of the most sought after sources of outdoor recreation, trails. So my project has been the sum of many smaller projects that ultimately work towards enhancing outdoor recreation experiences on trails. This project was done through my community sponsor, the International Mountain Bicycling Association, or IMBA for short. As an intern for one of the leading organizations in trail advocacy, I was exposed to many elements of the organization, but ultimately directed most of my work to accelerating a national coalition that was initiated by IMBA in August of 2021 called Trails Are Common Ground. Trails Are Common Ground is a national coalition of advocacy organizations that represent a variety of user groups. The campaign promotes the importance of respectful, inclusive, safe, and enjoyable experiences on trails. This mission is progressed through these 3 pillars. The first is to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion on trails. The second is to foster responsible trail use through user education. And the third is dedicated to trail modernization, which refers to progressive design and management techniques that can accommodate multiple user groups and increase trail use. These 3 pillars will be explained further as I present my contributions within each group over the past year. As I mentioned, the first pillar is focusing on increasing the diversity, equity, and inclusion on trails, with the goal of having trailheads represent the diversity of our country. The coalition believes this begins with respect for anyone and everyone. With that mission, the coalition works to ensure trails unify, not divide, bring joy, not conflict, and invite, not intimidate. My work in this realm has involved in-depth research on best practices for inclusive language, design standards for adaptive athletes, and engaging with underrepresented groups to discuss areas for improvement that will help make trails more welcoming for them. Following my research, I developed an outline for a proposed Trails Are Common Ground event, which would be applied at trail events such as mountain bike or running races. A Trails Are Common Ground event would commit to guidelines that raise the standards for inclusive language, category offerings, and accessible opportunities for new and adaptive athletes. The second pillar is dedicated to educating trail users to foster responsible behavior. However, as it turned out, educational efforts were necessary for land managers, retailers, and enforcement as well. During the beginning of my internship, I spent time on a trail etiquette quiz that is available on the Trails Are Common Ground website as an engaging method for expanding trail use knowledge. This project, however, was temporarily set aside when a rising issue on trails was brought to our attention. This issue is born from rapidly evolving technology that has outpaced land managers and policy when it comes to electric mountain bikes on trails. These electric mountain bikes are able to go increasingly faster, travel further, and with little visual variation from the traditional mountain bike. This has resulted in widespread confusion on how to manage, enforce, and reduce potential conflict with this rising user group. In an attempt to mitigate these issues, Engh helped initiate an electric bikes and electric motorcycles on trails working group. This group consisted of about 23 members that were involved with or represented user groups, land management agencies, and other policy organizations. I've been heavily involved with this group since the beginning of my internship and have been responsible for post-meeting summaries, assisting in the facilitation of meetings, and independent research projects on current issues surrounding electric mountain bikes on trails. With the valuable feedback from this group, I was able to produce the original layout for this identification guide. The purpose of this guide is to educate on the established electric bike class system and where they are likely to be permitted. This guide was distributed within land management agencies, to retailers, and on social channels with concerned trail advocacy groups. This graphic initiated many important conversations, but there was still confusion when it came to the out-of-class electric bikes that more accurately identify as electric motorcycles, which is where the second graphic came to life. To reduce the grouping of electric motorcycles with classified electric mountain bikes and presenting them as no different than their gas-powered counterparts, along with educating on the risks, both physically and financially, of riding these on non-permitted paths and trails. These 2 graphics were my most prominent deliverables over the past year, but other e-bike related projects have included a call to action writing piece that was addressed to manufacturers of electric mountain bikes to encourage them to willingly participate in a clear and consistent method of labeling the bikes within the 3-class system to help aid enforcement which would therefore protect access and also increase business. I also maintained an inventory sheet that included all of the existing brands and electric mountain bikes to be used as a tool for law enforcement as they navigate the complex variety of vehicles they may find on the trails. The third and final pillar is dedicated to trail modernization, which refers to methods of trail system design that will provide the best experience for all trail users. This is done through purposeful creation. Trail systems can reduce the potential for conflict and provide space for all users to fulfill their diverse experience desires. Within this pillar, I maintained another inventory sheet that contained existing systems that have adopted some form of progressive design or management technique, such as these listed up here. Within this pillar, I also had the opportunity in August of 2022 to shadow Draper City's Trails and Open Space Manager in the Corner Canyon Trail System, which is located in a heavily populated area and permits a wide range of users, including mountain bikers, runners, hikers, equestrians, and Class 1 electric mountain bikers. This has required thoughtful design and management plan to accommodate and sustain all of the users and the increase in trail use over the past few years. Progressive elements within the Corner Canyon Trail System include directional trails, user-specific trails, and progression areas. Following my tour, I wanted to survey individuals from each user group to get their feedback on the design and management methods that were shown to me. After speaking with individuals from every group, it was clear that the trail system is successful in offering a space for different users to fulfill their diverse experience desires. Following the survey, I put together a report that highlights the progressive design elements and responses that can contest to the functionality of those elements. The coalition hopes to continue developing case studies such as this one to showcase the benefits of these design and management strategies to aid land managers and communities in navigating potential conflict issues. So Trails Are Common Ground is still relatively young and constantly navigating their next steps, which has given me the invaluable opportunity to witness and contribute to its rapid evolution over the past year. I look forward to seeing how the coalition grows and the impact it will have on trails and the individuals that value them. If you are also passionate about trails, I strongly suggest learning more about the campaign and supporting their efforts. Last but not least, I would like to thank my community sponsor, David Weems, for his continuous support and guidance over the past year. His experience and expertise were instrumental in all that I have learned and have influenced the direction I hope to take my career going forward. I would also like to thank my advisor, Sally Thode. Her time as a land manager has been instrumental in the work I have done over the past year. Thank you.
Are there any big surprises for you or things like looking at this sport that you love in this extra light level of detail? Was there anything that you were like, whoa, I didn't realize that this is how things can work? Or
I think it was definitely a surprise working kind of more on the policy side of like trail access and management. I was shocked to learn how much detail and time is spent like kind of cultivating every word that's put into like all the education materials and all the newsletters, like how important it is really assessing the message you're trying to portray. That was kind of the biggest surprise for me.
I read an interesting paper at some point that was looking at the impacts of different types of recreation on wildlife, but I think the most interesting part was they surveyed recreationists and everyone underestimated the impacts of like the activity they chose and then like overestimated other, so kind of blaming other user groups. So with things like the quiz, do you still find that and like trail etiquette, there's a barrier of some people saying like, oh, well, I believe that horses shouldn't be allowed at all, or you know, motorized equipment should be allowed at all? Like, how do you, I guess, is there still a lot of challenge there in like getting, I guess, convincing people who have like a very strong opinion against a certain type of activity?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing, and kind of the like underlying mission, one of the underlying missions of the coalition is to unify all trail groups and kind of present the perspectives of all trail users to kind of bring awareness and an understanding for different trail users for one another. And in part of the trail etiquette quiz does like kind of demonstrate kind of the concerns and issues that other trail users face that maybe others don't consider, such as like equestrians' concern for like fast moving mountain bikes and stuff like that.
Thank you, Hailey. Well done.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Isabel English, and I am a second-year MEM student in the Integrative and Public Land Management track. My presentation is titled Recreation Management on Gunnison County Public Lands. We're going to be talking about designated camping and off-highway vehicles. When I came into the MEM program, I knew I wanted to learn about recreation issues and solutions to alleviate those. I'm grateful to have had 2 different fellowship opportunities that let me look at recreation issues in Gunnison County, and I'll be talking about both of those in this presentation. So first, I was an Innovative Finance for National Forest Fellow through the Center for Public Lands. Western received a National Forest Foundation grant to do research about funding and management mechanisms to support designated camping in the Gunnison National Forest around Crested Butte. I worked on a team with 2 outdoor industry MBA students, Lynn Mason and Layla Erickson, to get this project on the ground. So historically in the Gunnison National Forest and the Kebler, Slate River, Washington Gulch, Gothic, Brush Creek, and Cement Creek drainages, visitors could set up camp wherever they liked. But with increased use and visitation, this created a lot of impacts on the landscape. So in 2020, the forests began to transition to a designated camping system. So now there are over 200 sites that have been designated and have established camp posts and fire rings. But after these sites became designated, it left a big question mark on how they were going to be managed into the future now that they were established. There were a lot of negative impacts on the ground, largely from increased use. Occupancy rates have increased a lot, so visitors are continually camping in the same sites over and over. There are also issues with pollution, like in this image here, where visitors leave litter and trash in these camping areas. There have been reports of human and pet waste being disposed of improperly, whether too close to our freshwater ecosystems or campers repeatedly sleeping in these primitive sites, disposing of their waste in the same locations consecutively. There are also a lot of issues with campers building too large fire rings that were not really regulated that could increase our risk of fire in our forests. And one of the biggest issues was the expanding campsite footprint. They had to put in a lot of natural barriers to prevent people from trampling more vegetation, especially as RVs and campers have grown a lot in size over the last decade. On our research team, we largely explored how Western Colorado University could provide services and benefits to help the Gunnison National Forest and our community stakeholders manage these sites and achieve stewardship priorities and desired future conditions for public lands. We learned from the Conservation Finance Network and other Forest Service employees around the country who have done projects in their areas. We learned about federal fee structures, like collecting a fee through the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. But we found a lot of challenges to these because a lot of these sites are extremely dispersed from one another. So it's very hard to get the correct amount of infrastructure in order to collect a fee. We also explored concessionaire agreements, where the Forest Service signs an agreement with a third-party company to manage the sites. While this does increase the Forest Service's capacity to manage sites, they can't really do any additional on-the-ground stewardship just beyond managing campers coming in and out. So we really spent most of our project exploring a partnership between Western and the Gunnison National Forest to develop a student stewardship crew to manage campsites. We recommended a student stewardship crew to be on the ground, doing maintenance of these sites, picking up litter. Having students on the ground can also provide user outreach and education. They can provide up-to-date information about how to recreate responsibly in our forests, as well as it could be a place for students to do research and collect data about capacity, recreational uses, and things of that sort that could help inform future management decisions in the designated camping area. To support this effort, I developed a campus-wide survey where we learned that 67% of the students that responded had actually camped in these sites recreationally. We found that over 60% of students expressed interest in doing this type of work while they are studying at Western, and that these students comprised of 15 different majors on campus. So it's not just MEM students that could be interested in this work in the future. Together on our research team, we developed a very thorough recommendation report that we presented to the Western Cabinet and other local stakeholders in hopes that we can get this project moving in the future. It is our hopes that we can increase management capacity and stewardship on the ground in our forests, that students can provide additional visitor services that a concessionaire cannot, and that we can create a pipeline for students seeking federal careers by letting them develop experiences during their time at Western that can hopefully prepare them for careers after. So now I'm going to change gears a little and talk about another Center for Public Lands Fellowship I had working on the Marble Tourism Management Project, which largely focused on off-highway vehicles. The town of Marble is in Gunnison County, but it is like 3 hours away in the winter. It is very remote and isolated, and they only have about 160 year-round residents. So it's a very small community. Most of the visitors coming to this area are coming to see this image here of the Crystal Mill, which is one of Colorado's most photographed destinations. In a summer season, the town can see upwards of 17,000 visitors coming through their tiny town just to see this mill. Access to the mill is on the Lead King Loop, which is on a Forest Service road on the White River National Forest, and it is multi-use. So there are hikers, mountain bikers, equestrians, and there are also a lot of ATVs and off-highway vehicles being used in the area, which has created a lot of conflicts and issues with the local community. There have been issues with dust and noise, not only from the off-highway vehicles themselves, but radios and music as well. There have been a lot of reports of littering and pollution, as well as human and pet waste, similar to what we've seen local to us in Crested View. There's a lot of issues with visitors walking off trail or driving off trail, trampling vegetation, and parking in areas where it's prohibited. There are issues with visitors stealing artifacts like pieces of marble from the mining history in the past, as well as cultural resources. There have been especially a lot of complaints by locals about visitors trespassing onto private property, whether accidentally entering their houses themselves or just being unaware of property boundaries. And then there are a lot of conflicts between users themselves on this multi-use road. In addition to all these issues, there are some unique challenges to managing them that pertain to this location, one being the remoteness. It is hours away from gas, from emergency vehicles, and from law enforcement. There is very limited parking available in the town. And as you can see here, There are a lot of visitors that are coming and parking along these roads, which has caused issues with emergency vehicles not being able to access areas that they need. And then the biggest piece is enforcement. Gunnison County doesn't have any active law enforcement on that side of the county. Don't go commit a crime there because I said that, but there's also no Forest Service presence in that area as well. So it's really hard on the local community to combat this issue when they are left to deal with visitors. To try and come up with solutions to the issues of OHVs, the Aspirin-Sopris Ranger District, the town of Marble, and Gunnison County hired the Center for Public Lands to facilitate the Lead King Loop stakeholder group, which I had a privilege with assisting and co-facilitating. The stakeholder group comprises of representatives from a variety of interests on the issue, such as environmentalist groups or OHV users themselves. Together, we held stakeholder group meetings and workshops where we learned from experts. We hosted public listening sessions and did a community survey to solicit feedback on the issue. And I also helped develop a final recommendation report that we presented to the Board of County Commissioners in the White River National Forest. Now I'm working on implementing some of the recommendations pertaining to education from the stakeholder group. Western received a Colorado Tourism Office grant where I got to work on the More Mindful Marble Tourism Management Project. And with this funding, I got to work with first-year MEM student Andrew Wayrennen to host a training workshop in the town of Marble. During this workshop, we got to work with tourism workers and discuss ways to effectively communicate with visitors in both digital communications and on the ground in the forest. We also got to plan and prepare for the upcoming tourist season. I helped develop a communication and signage plan for both interpretive signage and informational surrounding the town of Marble. And then I developed a bunch of visitor communication materials that will be posted on town websites and provided in hotels and lodging and other community areas in the town of Marble. I also wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the really amazing opportunities and experiences that I've had while working on these projects and others. I got to present at the Conservation Finance Roundtable in Des Moines, Iowa with MBA students Lynn and Layla. We also presented at the Partners in the Outdoors Conference in Vail. With first-year students Annie Robertson and Kumar Flower K, we presented a poster at the National Outdoor Recreation Conference in Knoxville, Tennessee. And then lastly, on a different note, I presented a poster with Rebecca Breesmore about mine reclamation at a conference in Reno, Nevada. I'm very thankful for all of these amazing opportunities to network and share our research as well as learning from others throughout these processes. I have a ton of people to acknowledge and a bunch of different partners, but I especially want to shout out Dr. Melanie Armstrong, my advisor on both of these fellowships, my mentor, Sally Thode, who has helped me with all of my projects, my project partners, Lynn Mason and Layla Erickson, as well as our student fellows, Kumar Flower K and Annie Robertson, and the National Forest Foundation and all of our other collaborating partners. For the town of Marble, I'd like to thank Amber McMahill, my community sponsor from the Marble Crystal River Chamber, Ron Leach from the town of Marble, Andrew Wayrennen, first-year MEM student, the Colorado Tourism Office, and all of our other amazing partners. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
I've talked to you a bunch about this, but how has it been navigating all of the challenges, all the obstacles, and kind of the different intricacies for both of these projects, and what have you learned throughout this entire process?
I'd say for the Marble project, I encountered a lot more complications. Just being an outsider working in an entirely different community, it was really hard to understand people's opinions on the issue and how it affected everyone differently. One of the biggest takeaways was just to learn how to listen, to let people feel heard. And once you start there, it's a lot easier to start those conversations about how we can overcome things.
In the first project that you worked on, were all of those drive-in camping areas, or were any of them like backcountry hiking areas?
Pretty much all of them are driving. A lot of them require a high clearance four-wheel drive vehicle to access, but there are a handful, like maybe 5 that you have to walk a short distance from your car to the site, but mostly are accessed by vehicles. Thank you.
We're working with them.
What, Pete? All right, my name is Peter Engh, and for my project, I worked with Earl Richmond at the town of Buena Vista. He's the special projects coordinator for the rec department in BV. So when I first started going over to Buena Vista to try to define the project, I walked the river park with Earl, which is home to the Whipple Trail system, a system of trails that's interconnected that has a pedestrian bridge that connects the town of Buena Vista to the 4-mile travel management area, which is a BLM property. We talked about stakeholders in the area, such as the town of Buena Vista, and critical allies like the BV Single Track Coalition, who does a lot of trail work in the area, and local businesses like fly shops, water sports stores, and other businesses that pledge 1% to trails. We also talked about all the trail users and river users, local and from out of town. So my final deliverable is a 19-page report that covers future and current projects. It includes a historical timeline of how the Whitewater Park and the trail system came to be, the cost of current and future projects, and their funding sources, such as OEDIT grants or GOCO grants. Earl and I hope that this document can be used to secure future grant funding and from funding from private donors. This is a living document, and it can be updated annually to include future projects. You can find this document at the Town of Buena Vista website under the How Do I and Master Plans tab. It's going to be posted in the early summer after Earl presents it to the Trails and Advisory Boards. So here's a sample page from the document. It details the Whipple Trail Corridor Improvement Project, which is spearheaded by the BV Single Track Coalition. The town corridor is a 1,500-foot section of trail that the town actually owns. It acquired back in the 70s. And this project secured funding from the Chafee Common Ground Grant. And the town of Buena Vista also contributed about $15,000, and the Single Track Coalition also contributed like $10,000. It was started in November of 2022 and completed this past April. Also included in the document is a list of is a table of current projects, trail and whitewater projects. So you can see 2023 is a busy summer for these areas. There's the updated signage project, a bridge redecking project, trail improvements and bathroom renovations. And then also whitewater projects like improved boat launch and the pocket wave renovations. The pocket wave is a big feature for the Whitewater Park, but over the years, it's lost its peak hydraulic performance. So it now needs substantial renovation. Currently, there's been $220,000 raised for the project, and $170,000 of that is through private donation, which kind of goes to show how committed people in Buena Vista are to investing in their parks because they know it's such a draw for tourism. It also has a GoFundMe page that's raised $12,000. It's currently in the permitting process, securing permits through the Army Corps of Engineers, and they will be breaking ground in fall of '23. So those are all the current projects. Earl and I discussed some future projects. So laser, so I get the laser pointer. What's going on? All right, so this is kind of a relatively mellow stretch of river above the Whipple Trail Bridge. And we talked about how we could improve the area. We decided that adding current deflectors would create eddies and basically have staging areas for whitewater commercial tours to stage their boats before the boat ramp in the far left side of the picture there, to kind of ease congestion on that boat ramp. And it has the added benefit of creating habitat for trout. We also talked about adding boulders to the river. And luckily, if anyone's been to Buena Vista, there's a ton of boulders everywhere. So it's cheap material. And they've done it on other stretches of the river. And you can see my lovely Photoshop job on this. We also talked about adding a new wave feature below the Whipple Trail Bridge that would take the total features from 5 to 6 in the whitewater part, and have the added benefit of creating a nice, deep, cool pool that helps aquatic creatures like trout in the heat of the summer. It's also right below the Whipple Trail Bridge, so trail users can spectate whitewater raptors. And then for trail improvements, this section is also above the boat ramp and Whipple Trail Bridge. The Rock and Roll Trail in yellow is a trail that is a ADA trail. It's currently part of the improvement package. And we discussed adding ADA ramps to the river. When I was in Reno, Nevada, a couple weeks ago, I saw that there were ADA ramps for wheelchairs that ended in the river. So it allowed people in wheelchairs to physically access the river in a way that's not currently available for the Rock and Roll Trail. We also talked about connector trails to be built in red. The blue bench trail is kind of a trail in nowhere, so expanding that trail to the fisherman access stairs, and also kind of connecting it to the Rock and Roll Trail. Unfortunately, it's a little steep, so the connector trail from the Rock and Roll Trail to the bench trail wouldn't be ADA accessible, but we want to mitigate that by adding ADA ramps to the river, because just expanding ADA access is kind of encapsulate the spirit of inclusivity that EV is trying to extend to people. So yeah, if you want to find the document, it'll be online this summer. I want to acknowledge Earl Richmond. I couldn't think of a better person to cheerlead for Buena Vista. He's an incredibly nice guy and wears a lot of hats. Kelly Collins works for the BV Single Track Coalition. She's been a great help as well. Lois Walton is a knowledgeable historian in the area, and her grandson is attending Western right now. Roy Gerson used to be a public works employee. He also helped a lot with the timeline. And Garrett Smith, my advisor. If he hadn't taught me how to do GIS, I don't think I would have gotten my job, which is a field specialist position at the Nevada Division of Minerals. I'll be doing abandoned mine closures. And Garrett had nothing, or had effusive praise about Reno, saying it's not that bad. Yeah, thank you. Question.
Done. Okay. Questions, please.
So that last map that you showed with like the new trails and the ramps, that is in the future plan for this summer that you were talking about?
No, it's in the future for after the summer, after all the trail improvements get
Okay.
done this summer, yeah.
So how is the hydraulic performance of that one wave, I forget what it was called, actually being improved by project? What is actually happening?
So basically they go in and kind of dig out the lower pool to kind of create a bigger difference between the upper height of the river and the lower height of the river, and that creates kind of like a smoother wave to surf. So it kind of creates like, you know, instead of like this, it's kind of like you can surf it better. So thank you.
Thank you. Well done, Peter.
Hello, my name is Garrett Konet, and over the past year, I worked with the Bureau of Land Management and done some good office to develop a carbon rocks and cheatgrass management plan. For those of you who do not know what cheatgrass is, cheatgrass is an invasive annual winter wheatgrass. It's another common name for it is downy brome, which it gets its name from almost these hair-like structures on its leaves and its stem. And also the seeds on the end of the stem droop over. Cheatgrass was introduced around in the South Americas in like the 1800s. Looking for like an actual point of where it was introduced, there's many resources that could be identified for how it got introduced. May have been thinning out grain that was being sold to the Americas, or being used as early vegetations for cattle to feed on in the spring. Now, cheatgrass really does put the word cheat in cheatgrass, since it germinates early in the spring, outcompeting a lot of native flora to Colorado. And then on top of that, cheatgrass is also a little bit hard to get rid of, since those seeds that are produced in the seed bank can survive up to 2 to 3 years, and each plant alone can produce upwards of 25 to 5,000 seeds. And then another issue with cheatgrass is that it has a positive relationship with wildfires and also loves disturbed areas. So for example, when wildfire goes to a cheatgrass infested area, cheatgrass is going to be one of the first species that's going to come back and quickly outcompete any other native species. And it also has a very quick life cycle, which in my experience witnessed almost 2 life cycles just at Harmon Rocks and Signal Peak alone. And in this picture right here, you can kind of see where it starts to turn purple on the left side of the plant, where it's getting ready to disperse those seeds that it's currently growing. As I mentioned before, cheatgrass has a very quick life cycle, and these snippets of the grass right here could only be upwards of a few weeks apart to not even a month apart, going from a really rich green color, slowly transitioning into almost a red wine purplish color before it disperses its seeds, turning into a then tan and very dried out plant, which also becomes then a fine kindling during peak fire season. The 2 main sites that I had surveyed were Harmon Rocks, which is a 14,000 acre recreation area just south of Gunnison, managed by Bureau of Land Management, with the base area being managed by the city of Gunnison. Harmon Rocks also has mud closures to help preserve the trails as the snow starts to melt and before the trails dry out. And also during the spring, it has regular closures in the backcountry for Gunnison sage grouse licking habitat to help preserve those birds during their mating season. Harmon Rocks is also readily known for its recreation opportunities, such as mountain biking, camping, climbing, and then during the winter seasons, they groom the trails for Nordic skiing. And Signal Peak, which is just adjacent to Western, is another 14,000 acre property managed by the Bureau of Land Management, with the front range of it being managed by Western and Gunnison Trails. It also has sprinklers for the Gunnison Trails as well, protecting its licking habitat, and is more commonly used for trail running, hiking, and mountain biking. For the survey methods for this project, we had used field maps to plot down points, lines, and polygons for populations of cheatgrass that we had found. As this first iteration of the survey, we had surveyed the roads and trails of Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak, but only had pertained to the front country of each area, since those are the areas that get the most use to stop it in the front of each area before it makes it all the way throughout the recreation areas. And in doing so, we walked 10 to 25 feet from the trails to see if cheatgrass was spreading from the trails, since they're largely disturbed areas. The areas that were surveyed during this project were Hartman Rocks front area 1 and 2. In the map right now, that is where I had surveyed the front area 1 of Hartman Rocks, and mainly found cheatgrass along popular climbing areas, the ring dike campsites, and Main Street, which is the road that runs between most popular climbing areas between Buddha's Bellies and the ring dike campsites. As for surveying Signal Peak, I didn't find any like major populations of cheatgrass when surveying. And as part of this cheatgrass management plan, I had also included best practices for management solutions to help control the spread of cheatgrass. As for biological management practices, there is no USDA approved practices to handle cheatgrass, but there are certain bacteria and funguses that do help repel or even exterminate cheatgrass. As for grazing can be carried out to help manage cheatgrass during early spring, but no species is going to go specifically out of its way to manage cheatgrass. And then once it starts to get further on in its life cycle, no species is really going to want to eat it, because due to the hairy awns of its seeds, it's almost like eating pins and needles. And as for physical methods of removing cheatgrass can be pulled and either stored in a bag in the sun to help cook out the plants and destroy the seeds of those plants, or taken to the dump and disposed. The only downside of this is that depending on how fast some plants of cheatgrass are growing, you might end up spreading more seeds than you're trying to remove. And as for chemical methods, one that the BLM uses and we've gone out this year to do is using Plateau, which is a pre-emergent herbicide that specifically targets prairie grasses. And as for cultural methods, this kind of more or less includes of making sure that when you're going from like recreation area to recreation area, that you're not carrying seeds or tracking mud everywhere, you're cleaning your equipment, or even in some extreme cases, there's stops by government professionals to make sure that you aren't transporting invasive species. As part of one of my final projects, I had included a survey report of areas that were surveyed. Chemical treatment was carried out at Hartman's, and recommendations for signage for the importance of cheatgrass, how to identify it, and how it's going to travel from one area to another. Signs to remind people to clean their equipment, because it's another way cheatgrass can be spread. And then the recommendations for a cleaning station at the bottom of the base areas for people to clean their boots and mountain bikes to stop spread of cheatgrass to any mud or dirt that we're going to get caught in your tires or boots. As well as 2 recommendations for some habitat restoration at Hartman Rocks, one of which is an old trail system that's no longer on the maps or gets used for its deconstruction and restoration to the surrounding stage. And then some erosion control over by the front kiosk at Kill Hill, since I found a population of cheatgrass maybe 2 feet from the information kiosks where it was eroding down the hillside. And then a use study for Signal Peak, since there's a lot of social trails, and to help prevent the degradation of that habitat, to help close those trails down and figure out which ones are actually in use. And as for my final deliverables is a cheatgrass management plan covering how to identify cheatgrass or survey methods, maps of the recreation areas split up into each front, middle, and back range per use and trail densities, and management recommendations, a survey report with the survey timeline, mapped of the surveyed areas, management recommendations, and habitat recommendations. I'd like to thank my advisor Sally Thought for her input on this project, my community sponsor Brian Stevens, and Jim Lovelace, the BLM, Brian Romero with the BLM for his input and edits on this plan, Andrew Bryant, who went out with me to first start surveying cheatgrass and to go over our survey methods, and who had allowed me to tag along during the herbicide spraying this past fall. Tim Kruller with his input on Signal Peak with Gunnison Trails, Dr. Pat McGee for his assistance in helping to explain cheatgrass and some of our work, and Tara Simic, our cheatgrass coordinator, who allowed me to sit on some meetings with other agencies pertaining to cheatgrass. And then one thing I kind of found funny during my survey, since you're walking 10 to 25 feet from the road, you look very lost because you're looking down. So I really would have people ask me if I'm lost, am I having truck problems, am I lost something, or am I specifically recall one person tell me like, that's not a trail, right? It's like, yeah, I know, I'm looking for grass. Now time for questions. Questions for Garrett?
Yeah, is cheatgrass germinating right now this early in the season, and how tall was that species grow?
So cheatgrass has been germinating since last fall. During the winter, you could probably picked up some chunks of snow and found cheatgrass already starting to grow its leaves, which is why it's such a prolific spreader, because by spring it's already going to be up, ready to go to produce its seeds. And cheatgrass can grow upwards from 6 to 30 inches. And the tallest plant I found at Hartman's was around 15 to 16 inches, but that plant was living its best life because it was basically sitting at the base of a rock where water was running off right on top of it.
Another question, please.
Is the herbicide that's being applied, you said that it's specific to prairie grasses, is it a general herbicide that affects prairie grasses, or? I was wondering about its persistence in the environment.
So it's specifically designed to target prairie grasses, so it can affect other native species that are prairie grasses. It has, from my understanding, at least minimum effects on woody species. And it's only a pre-emergent, so it stops the seeds from activating and germinating, depending on the brand of herbicide, up to 3 to 4 years.
Well done, Garrett. We have ample time to direct questions to the entire panel. So would anyone like to start us off? Yes.
Yes, how have all of your thoughts or intentions towards recreation from either a career perspective in management or the personal recreation you engage in changed, if at all, through your work?
I can start maybe. I had some different personal opinions than I did professionally working with a stakeholder group, especially. You're supposed to be unbiased, but as a recreator, I recognize that off-highway vehicles have a greater impact, and it is hard to share those spaces. So I think that, in the future, I'd like to continue researching these issues and evaluating how we can kind of make the best of both worlds with sharing different uses.
From my experience, I definitely would have to say my project made me readily more aware of like how easy we can spread invasives. Because just getting more into mountain biking and a lot of stuff this year, and then doing this cheatgrass project, I really kind of made sure that like I wasn't carrying out any invasives like on my bike during it, but also throughout the survey. I remember at one point at Buddha's Belly, kind of really was like eye-opening thing. Like climbing equipment also spreads cheatgrass very well, because I remember looking up at the rock wall at one point and seeing cheatgrass just hanging out some of the cracks.
I'm a fly fisherman, and I think it's pretty heartening to see that community kind of invest in river improvement projects and create this positive feedback loop of creating a better environment, which then creates a better user experience and then gets more people caring about that resource. And also seeing the whitewater park in DV, it can also create habitat for fish, and swimming and recreating in the river makes people extremely happy. So.
For me, I think it made me realize how privileged trail users in Gunnison County are. A lot of the issues that I worked on and the people involved in the steering committee came from like urban settings and trail systems that were located in heavily populated areas. And I guess I just didn't realize the level of conflict and the amount of thought that's required for trail systems in those areas as opposed to what we are used to.
Thank you for that question, Courtney. Anyone else?
Can I ask a question, Micah?
Yeah, please, Joan.
I'm curious, what was your most unexpected challenge that you faced?
Okay, I guess for me, the town of Marble, I didn't realize how angry and upset people were. And when I pulled up into a room of angry people for the first time, it was kind of hard to take in and know what to say. But I think, again, kind of what I was saying to Brennan earlier, having to take a step back and really listen to everyone's.
For me, I definitely would have to say that being able to explain to people what cheatgrass looks like and the differences, because there's a few native species in Colorado that kind of look like cheatgrass, and then there's also very like, it's like custom species. Like we've got smooth brome out here, and like the main difference between cheatgrass and smooth brome is that smooth brome, it's going to stand straight up versus cheatgrass where it's just drooping down. But they very much do almost look like the same plant.
For me, I think when I first started defining the project, there was a million projects that they had going on in Buena Vista. So trying to pin down something that I could do during this time that would be beneficial for the future and the present. And yeah, that was pretty tricky, I'd say.
One of the challenges that I found to personally be the most frustrating was dealing with the industry for electric mountain bikes. Not all of them, but generally I would say they weren't as willing to go out of their way to help our efforts and kind of make it easier on land managers and enforcement, just through simple methods that would make a huge difference.
Thank you, Jillian. Other questions?
It sounds like you just said the electric mountain bike company specifically. Do you have any sense for, like, specifically where maybe being less cooperative? I can there are like stories or interpretations of that come up in my mind. I'm wondering if that has, like, do you know why? Do you have any perspective?
I guess one good example comes from, there are like several companies that make out of class electric mountain bikes. I would hesitate to call them mountain bikes, electric motorcycles. And they often market them as electric mountain bikes by putting on like pedal kits and whatnot so that they can kind of blend in with the traditional mountain bike. So they're kind of like going against our efforts intentionally to make it more difficult for land managers to identify and for other land management agencies to kind of distinguish the type of vehicles that they want on their trails.
Great follow-up. Anyone else? Brent?
As like recreation continues to kind of trend upwards, how can you guys as land managers or in your roles be both welcoming and inclusive while communicating kind of the really big impact of the recreation activities that new user groups will be participating in?
They expand, I mean, I'm not gonna be working in recreation, but expanding free access and making sure you're advertising that it's, you know, like you don't have to buy a bunch of gear to go do certain recreation activities, and just being inclusive too. Like including the community and throwing free events and stuff, so.
I think community engagement is a really important piece of that for sure. And I think having entities that can continue looking at new forms of recreation and usage and evaluating that in the future is super.
On my end of things, I'd have to say is just more emphasis on precaution and awareness, because you never really know what you're gonna be like walking through unless you're aware through like signage, and you never know what's gonna be stuck at the bottom of your boot at the end of the day.
I recently accepted a position in the Parks and Rec department in a larger county than Gunnison, and it's very mountain bike focused. And I think entering this position, I want to be mindful of like encouraging the perspective of other users, because I know that place in particular focuses heavily on solely mountain bike intended use. So I think it's valuable to offer opportunities for all users.
Any other questions from the panel? Yeah.
Thank you all for your presentations first off. Between your first meeting a year and a half ago and now, what are some of the biggest changes or things that you realized or were surprised by between then and now leaving?
Meetings for
Just like between entering this work and then now exiting, now graduating, what were you surprised by?
I was very surprised by people's sentiments of recreation. I thought that, you know, adding recreation infrastructure would be like really supported and welcomed because it can help, you know, increase our capacity to deal with the amount of visitors. But I had to learn that there's also a lot of opposition to adding more development and infrastructure, because a lot of local communities can see that as expanding their industry, and they don't necessarily want more visitors. They just want visitors to come and behave responsibly while they're there. So I think that was a big learning curve for me, and being able to communicate the importance of infrastructure with these entities and try and convey that message was really surprising.
For me, one thing I definitely say was like interesting to get used to is how readily the community wants to get rid of cheatgrass. Just talking to like random people on the street about it, to land managers and stuff, and people that have it in their yard and they want it gone. And then now I also see cheatgrass everywhere. It's like something I can't unsee now, since I spent like the last year just looking for it.
I think one thing that surprised me was the efficiency of a small town when they want to get something done. When I first went over to Buena Vista, there was a lot of projects that were like in the tunnel. And then going back recently, a lot of the projects that either started or been finished. And it's really cool to see just how efficient a small governing body can move on a public resource like that.
I think one of the biggest changes I noticed with the coalition I worked with being so young, kind of the direction and our intended deliverables seem to change quite frequently, just as new issues rose and like different people and stakeholders came to the table. We had to kind of be very flexible with the direction we had originally intended on going. And so that was different for me and kind of forced me to be more open-minded and not so set on what I had originally intended on doing.
I have a question for Isabel. What was one of the solutions that the town agreed upon to reduce or, I guess, make them happier with recreation?
So one of the things that's kind of new being implemented this season, they couldn't really permit access to the loop or do any radical changes. So they're trying to do kind of smaller steps and then evaluate how effective that was. So to limit the use of OHVs in the area this season, they have reduced the amount of available truck trailer parking from like 30 to 12 spots. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in real time. But they're hoping that with those changes and messaging efforts, they'll be able to get visitors aware of these changes to try and limit the amount of OHVs that come at the same time.
Last one, Nick.
I just have a quick follow-up to that. So there is an organization in Colorado that supports OHV, it's like a 4x4 organization. They do trail upkeep and stuff like that. Were they part of this at all, or?
We've worked with Stay the Trail, which is an OHV responsible recreation nonprofit, and they helped us with all of our communication guides for visitors, as well as developing a presentation about how tourism workers can specifically communicate with OHV users, because it is a bit of a different user type and demographic. So we have engaged with them as well.
Wonderful, incredible work. Let's give them a hand.